Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Inessa Bosson. I'm an open source program manager at OpenTeams and head of open source architect community, the host of today's event. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Ben Rogojan, who you might also know as the Seattle data guy through his wildly popular newsletter and videos. And before we dive into the topic of today's event, a few words about open source architect community and OpenTeams. The OSA community, as we call open source architect community for short, connects architects and the seasoned technical leaders who are passionate about open source technology. To learn more about the community and how to join us, visit our webpage, openteams.com/openteams-communities, and I will put a link in the chat shortly so you don't have to memorize it. And OpenTeams, the sponsor of the OSA community. OpenTeams is the global technology leader in open SaaS AI, machine learning, and data science. We bridge the gap between enterprises and open source projects behind the cutting edge AI ML technologies, facilitating collaboration, adoption, and optimization. And on to the topic of today's event. Ben, the first question for you. Over the course of your career, you had an opportunity to work across multiple industries and at several companies, including Meta. When did you decide to start your own consulting business? What was the turning point?
Sure. I honestly say I kind of started a little bit on accident. Early on in my career, I had someone who just happened to, I was working with them at one of my companies, and not my companies, but at one of my jobs. And they just asked me, they're like, hey, do you ever do things on the side? Sometimes I do some work. Do you ever want to help? I was like, yeah, sure. I'd be happy to help. And didn't think about that for 6 months, 9 months, and then eventually they reach out to me and they're like, hey, we just have this. It was a pretty basic project. We just have this project. We need help migrating from essentially Microsoft Access to SQL Server, and could you help? And so as I slowly realized this was going to be a bigger project, I set up a consulting company. And in that first year, did decently well. There was a lot of work for that one project, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I could do this again. And then just through time, I've eventually realized that it's not going to be as easy as just landing that client as I did. Like, it was like they came to me, so I realized I had to learn a lot of new things. But two, I think there was something to be said about like enjoying the freedoms of kind of doing what work kind of comes my way, being able to work on multiple projects and things of that nature. So I don't know if there was a specific turning point. It kind of was this slow roll, over time, because I basically worked or had this consulting company throughout my career for about 7-8 years before I quit fully when I was at Facebook. So it wasn't until I got to a point where at Facebook I was thinking somewhere in my brain, I can both get a promotion at Facebook and also somehow continue doing side hustle consulting. And I was like, okay, they're starting to bump up against each other. I think I need to kind of make a choice. So I think that was like the final turning point, was like, okay, I can't do everything. I do need to be specific on where I spend my time.
I sometimes say that multitasking is a bit overrated.
Yes, it is.
But at the same time, it is exciting to have options. And starting your own consulting company can sound exciting, but once you leap, you'll quickly realize that there are a lot of challenges and expected responsibilities that come with flying solo. And I'm curious, what were unexpected challenges you faced early on, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. Yeah. So like I referenced earlier, like the first client that came was easy, right? Because my friend asked me, like, do I want to do some work for them? Right. And some people ask me, like, who was your first client? And it's kind of like, how'd you get your first client? And I think usually people are asking that question because it's like, that's the hard thing to do. And my first client was arguably easy. The problem is then you very quickly realize, oh, but the second client isn't, right? So the first client, again, first year, basically made as much money as I was making in my job. But then the next year, I think I made like $5,000 or $6,000, and I was like, oh wait, like I was considering quitting my job, and now I'm only making, in terms of consulting, not nowhere near enough to quit my job. So I need to figure out how to solve that problem. And so that's when I started like reading books and being like, okay, well, how do you land clients? How do you get, people interested in what you're doing? That's when I started putting out more content as well. I think I was already putting out some content. I was writing some things, both for fun. Like I had some blogs that I was writing for fun that had nothing to do with tech. And then then I started being like, okay, let me start writing about tech and things that I know, things that I'm learning. That's when I started sharing that. And then slowly I started, after time, having people kind of interested in like having me come and help them consult.
This is very insightful. I am curious, what skills do you think are essential to be successful in consulting?
Yeah. So, I mean, number one's obviously whatever the skill is that you're selling. I think that one's obvious. I think the harder things are definitely all of those softer skills, and the skills that have more to do with your business side. So it's like, okay, how are you going to land clients, right? And I've been talking to a lot of consultants over the past few years, but especially recently, as I've been trying to help other people kind of come down the same path and find their path. And the big thing is like, okay, you need to land clients. That's kind of one of the first big things a lot of people need to solve, and helping them figure out what that skill should be that they're going to kind of go down. I like to say, like, for most people, you can either do something like networking, you can do sales tactics, so like cold DMs, and you can kind of do marketing and content marketing. And those are probably like the three big buckets. There are some others as well, but those are the ones that when I talk to people, that's where a lot of their clients come from. So working on those skills, right? Working on your ability to figure out, okay, what do my clients care about, and how do I like message that correctly, right? Because there's our skill set that we have, right? Okay, we write SQL, maybe you work with Airflow, or you work with some open source tooling, but that's not what generally clients care about. They've got some pain points that have to do with the business that are like, hey, I want to increase my sales. I want to understand, my marketing mix model better. I want to, something in the business that is a business problem, and that our tools and our skills only help solve, but they don't necessarily like solve in the way of like, hey, I build optimized pipelines. That may or may not be what your clients are looking for. So trying to understand those pain points, I think, is a hard thing. One, because you have to kind of step away from your own kind of desires and needs, and like think about other people's and be like, okay, well, what does someone who's, again, running a business care about, or someone who's running a marketing team or sales team or something of that nature care about? And how do I speak to those things when I try to either, sell them via cold DM, or sell them via content, or sell them, via networking. And then also like just having a process once you do get in front of someone to like sell to them, right? Like it's like, okay, well, now like they're interested. How do I run a sales call? How do I, make sure I kind of understand what they're, where they're fitting in terms of budget, and all of these other skills that kind of come along with it, right? Because those are the things that like make you successful, I think, in the long term. Obviously, your skill set is what people are paying for, but like how you sell it, how you create that narrative, is very important and difficult to like master. I'm constantly trying to improve that, constantly trying to figure out, okay, what do people care about? Because it does change over time, to some degree, as like new trends come in, and new problems come up.
I would also, from my inside, doing a bit of consulting in the past, is that communicating about your work throughout the projects is also something that not come natural to many engineers, especially those who are not embedded in the open source ecosystem. And this is very important when you work with clients, with external clients.
Yeah.
You touched on this a little, and the next question I have for you: technology, including data space, evolves rapidly, and how do you stay informed about the latest technologies in data science and infrastructure?
Yeah. So generally, it's a combination of, one, reading other people's content as well, reading other people's content that I think have a pulse on the industry. There's a lot, now with Substack, I think there's a lot of really good content, especially there, where people are just sharing their ideas, sharing the work that they're doing. I think that's another cool thing, is like a lot of people are even more open to, sharing exactly almost how they're building things. You can You can read like plenty of research, or maybe not research, but like plenty of papers on like, okay, how do these big tech companies set up their data infrastructure, which is nice and can be interesting. But I think it's also good to like read on other people who are maybe just in like enterprise and be like, hey, is enterprise even setting up their data infrastructure the same way? Can I find someone in the on the more enterprise side that writes content and see what they're building? Because there's usually differences in how people build infrastructure based on, you know, how much budget they have, how many employees a company might employ just to build infrastructure. So part of it's keeping up, part of it's I think understanding that, you know, different companies are in different places, and if you understand that, you can better sell to maybe your target audience, right? Like maybe if you're on the data side, Iceberg sounds nice, but for some companies maybe they will never be able to kind of shift to that for one reason or another. They've got 10 different toolings, and it's really hard to get, you know, all the people to all communicate and get them on one page and pick that tool. So maybe you can help one team move to Iceberg, but maybe you can't help the entire organization to move. So just I think reading from multiple sources, trying to understand, and also just doing the work. I think, you know, I spend some time learning new tools. I pick like one or two, maybe a year to learn, but I also just let my job kind of dictate some of that as well, where it's like, okay, based on what I'm working on, based on what people are asking for, are there new skills that I should really be digging into?
Are there any specific content creators or communities that you follow?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few that I like for more let's see, Daniel Beach. He's got a data engineering, like was it Data Engineering Central. He's generally writing more on like open source tooling and a lot of like tooling in that space. So Daniel Beach. I don't forget Olga's last name, but Olga, she runs an analytics Substack as well, where she writes a lot about like A/B testing and things of that nature. So if you want to understand more on that side, um, who else? And then Yuki, and I'm bad with last names. So Yuki, he's got like the toolbox, something like the data toolbox, and he's been doing like dives into new tooling and digging into that as well. So if you're looking for people who are maybe digging into some of these things, I think those are some possibilities.
Well, I'll reach out after the event to ask for the links, and we'll share in our LinkedIn group after the event.
Awesome.
The next question I had for you, one of the challenges of consulting is that there are periods of downturn, and every business experiences that, but I think it's especially visible for smaller teams. And I'm curious if you experience that, maybe not, maybe you've been incredibly lucky, but if you experience that, how did you address it? And did you pivot into a different line of work? Did you expand your services? How did you address those business downturns?
Yeah, and obviously, you know, we all run into downturns, especially like, you know, downturns I think mean different things for different people, right? Like maybe you're making less than you're accustomed to, and I think that can be a downturn regardless of, you know, maybe you're still comfortable, but maybe you're you know, it never feels good to make less than what you were used to the year before. You know, for me, some of the things I do is I have some things that are maybe more on subscription, in terms of like I have like my newsletter that, you know, with Substack has been nice. It's not a ton of money, but it's like a little bit to where I never feel too bad about like if I have a slightly slow month. On the other side, I think there is an aspect of learning to ride the waves to a degree, right? Like sometimes money is great, sometimes it's not. And it's just, you got to be honest that, hey, sometimes if you're making a lot of money for a certain period of time, that's great, but maybe eventually, you know, it will dip, and you shouldn't expect it to always be high and always be growing. There is some level of lumpiness, I think, to consulting, because you'll be spending some time doing work, and you'll be spending so much time doing work that you won't be doing marketing activities. So then once you get out of that very busy cycle, you know, then suddenly you're kind of stuck, not getting as much work. Sometimes, you know, I think, especially if you're early on, there are some services you can always look into. For example, in the tech world, people always need like technical writers. That's something that I did, especially early on. I wrote a lot for other companies just as I was like kind of breaking into the world, kind of understanding what's going on. And it's usually a good way to kind of learn more about vendors, their tooling, what's going on. And they usually need help because there's not a lot of technical writers out there that can maybe help them talk about their tool. So that's something that you can look into if you're like, okay, maybe I just need a little bit of work for now. Some vendors just need help with content because, again, it's hard to write content. And that's what I'm focused on. So maybe writing is not for everyone, but that's one space that I think can be helpful. I think, like you said, looking for possibly new trends, I think, is always a good plan. For a long time, I think Databricks has been a really big tool that's been growing. And I told a lot of consultants, like, if you want to grow somewhere, or if you want to look for somewhere to kind of like launch your consulting career, I said, start working on Databricks because they're growing. And if they're growing, that means that they're putting a lot of marketing, a lot of people are using it, but it's a difficult tool to use. So people are going to need help with it. So I do think there's a lot there where it's like, you should have some idea of kind of where the overall market's kind of headed, because it just helps you, maybe jump on a wave if you need to get into that because things are maybe slowing down in the prior kind of thing you were consulting on.
Those are great tips. And the next question I have is kind of the opposite of downturns, is when you get a lot of work to the point that you start thinking that you wish you could replicate yourself. But in reality, you have to think about scaling your team. So I'm curious if you are scaling your team, and if not, how do you address the challenge of having too much work happening at the same time?
Yeah, no, the thing I've had, and I've talked to a lot of other people about in terms of like how they handle it. Some people like the idea of building an agency, right? And if that's you do have to kind of make that distinction. Like, in your mind, what is your goal? Is your goal to, I want to build an agency, or is your goal, I want to be an independent consultant? Maybe it's not necessarily a lifestyle business, but more of like, this is, just me, my independent business. But again, you'll still have a lot of work come up and it'll be too much work. And how do I handle that situation? So, if your goal is to scale an agency, then you have to make that effort to like grow an agency. You're going to spend a lot of time in sales. Most people I've talked to that have done a good job of scaling an agency, like to a large number, had a few things. One, they usually had a co-founder so that, they can kind of help solve that like first hire problem. When you have projects that are maybe a little bigger, there's at least two people that can kind of handle it, and maybe you can act like four people, even though you're just two. The other side is, I've often found that companies that scale really big at first often were well connected with vendors who could help them kind of get business continually flowing on both sides. So maybe you are getting a lot of business on your side and you're sending it to the vendor, and then the vendor, is happy with that, so they send you more work. And so that's really a big aspect. It's like your job, if you're scaling a business or scaling an agency in particular, is to land business. It's not to do the work. And so you have to very quickly figure out, how do I get out of doing the work, and how do I just spend basically all of my time landing clients? Because that's what you have to do. You just have to keep the pipelines full, and that is your job. On the other side, like if you are like, look, I don't want to do that, but every once in a while I need help, growing my business. One, I think it helps to have a network of other contractors that you can reach out to. One reason, I've created kind of a community for consultants, and that's one reason I've done it, is so that I can both reach into that community and be like, hey, I have some work? Does anyone want to help me with this? But also they have that same access, right? Like they can go access it and be like, hey, I think I get like one or two jobs that I see in that community open up a week where someone's like, hey, I need whatever, a JavaScript thing, or maybe a specific data kind of workflow thing. I think there was like an Azure networking request not that long ago, and all of those things where it's either a specific skill set or just because you need, more time and you want to bring someone on for a little bit, just to have that network that you can reach out to and be like, hey, can you help me on this project? I had someone who I was talking to recently who, just to like take that to the next level, they're like, on top of that, when I do have like contractors or subcontractors that I bring on, I like have like a quick onboarding that I go through with them, or like I share with them. That's like, hey, here's how our business works. Here's how I want you to deliver work, right? Just to make it that much smoother, right? Like if you do want to bring someone on, don't just bring them on and be like, hey, do this work. It's really good idea to like make sure it's clear on how you want them to operate, especially if it's a subcontractor, because it's not necessarily fair like to expect them to work like you work if you haven't told them how you want them to work. So just if you want to make it even smoother, make it seem even better for the client too, not just for your relationship with your subcontractor, but also with your relationship with your client, right? Like if they have some onboarding that says, here's how we write code, here's how we deliver deliverables, here's how often I want you to communicate with the client, and make that clear. It just solves a bunch of problems that you in communication that you won't have to solve in the future.
One of the challenges for scaling teams and businesses is ensuring quality and consistency, and having some kind of mechanism to align the practices. Agree on best practices for the work that you do is very important, and this is a great approach to have an onboarding session with the subcontractors to align the vision for the project and expectations of the client. You briefly touched on your newsletter, and in your intro, I also mentioned that you have a newsletter and video content, and that there is some other content that is wildly popular across social media. I'm curious, at what point did you decide to dedicate more time to your personal brand? And was it natural for you, or is it something that you decided to do when you had less work and kind of had to think how you can become more visible in the data consulting business?
Yeah. So I mean, it was pretty early on. Again, like as I was like trying to figure out how to land clients, that was something that became clear as a good place to start. If you share a bunch of content, if you share a bunch of kind of your knowledge, people like respond to that. People tend to like want to know more. I think some of us tend to be worried that like maybe if we share all of our secrets, people won't buy our services. Generally, people aren't like what they're buying is a lot of the execution. They aren't buying necessarily the ideas, right? They want this stuff to be done. So I think that's something, if you're ever concerned about sharing content, it's okay. Like no one's gonna like maybe you'll have some percentage of people who will go away and not pay for your services, but they probably weren't going to pay for them anyways. They're just wanted the answer and then they were going to solve it themselves. But there's a portion of people that don't want to solve it themselves. They just want to know that you know the answer. So I think that's a big part of it. Well, another thing to think about as you're kind of thinking about content, and something I learned is like it's kind of nice to have like not ambiguity, but like almost obscurity, right? Early on when you're creating content, having a bunch of people looking at your content, if it's not good, isn't great. So as you're doing it, and as you make that decision, if that is the decision you make, I would not feel bad getting less people viewing your content. I actually liked it because eventually when you have a lot of people looking at your content, suddenly you're like, oh man, I'm sending out a newsletter to 100,000 people. Is it good? Did I make an error somewhere? 100,000, people are going to see my error. I mean, not everyone opens the newsletter, but whatever percentage, 50,000 people are going to see my error. So I think that's an aspect of it as well. But yeah, overall, it didn't necessarily come natural. I was just, I just wanted to share, and it seemed like a good way. So, it was writing, it was fun. It's still fun, but like, it's just something to like share my ideas, help me learn too. It helps you like crystallize your thinking. You also see yourself get better. Like I'm looking at older Medium articles that I wrote or things like that. And it's like, they weren't that great. They weren't that structured. They weren't that planned. And now, as time kind of goes on, I kind of take more and more time. And I'm trying to think about how to make the writing clearer and crisper and make it, better images and things of that nature. So, it didn't necessarily come naturally, but like, through time, you kind of get better and better. And like anything else, right? Like you can be bad. In theory, you can be bad at math, but if you get better, if you put some effort into it, maybe you'll get better. So, yeah.
That's a great advice. We have covered a lot of ground, and at this point, I would like to open up the floor for questions from the audience. So please feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself.
Hey, Rajesh here.
Hi, Rajesh, welcome.
Thank you. Ben, in terms of the outreach, what worked well for you? Like LinkedIn versus cold marketing, like direct messages or networking events, which ones were more effective? At least I'm not finding LinkedIn to be very effective.
Yeah. Yeah, so whichever method you pick, I always want to say it's going to take time regardless. If you do cold DMs, I think a lot of people like the idea of cold DMs because it sounds fast. If you talk to salespeople, they say whatever it is, like 10 or 12 touches, which probably still translates to like 3 to 6 months of reaching out to someone and then reaching out to more than one person, right? And trying to contact them and get them interested in what you're serving. LinkedIn can work. So when you say LinkedIn, do you mean like putting out content? Do you mean reaching out to people in cold DMs? What do you mean by LinkedIn?
The cold DMs, yeah.
Yeah, cold DMs in particular, I think, I in the community that I'm running, I put out, I think that in a post one day that cold DMs don't work. And when I say that, like, I mostly mean that if you really want like a cold DM to kind of work better, what I will tell most people is like try to at the very least in like if a person has like content that they share on LinkedIn or something like that, try to engage with them, try to like at least get them accustomed to seeing your face. Because if all you do is send out a cold DM, they know you're selling to them. No one has time for that. Everyone else on LinkedIn is selling to them. So you kind of have to do, more than just, send out a cold DM. I don't think that works for a lot of people, unless because like basically the only way a cold DM works is if it hits a person at the exact time that they have the problem, essentially, or they have to remember you in a month when they have that problem. So it's really hard to get cold DMs to work. If you are going to do LinkedIn, I would say, figuring out some sort of content that maybe you can share that then gets shared to multiple people that could then speak to a specific pain point. Again, it's got to speak to some specific pain point that a client that yours wants to solve. Because then it reaches out to more people. And then if you keep doing that for, again, 6 months, someone will eventually be like, oh yeah, Rajesh is the person that solves whatever the problem is. I want to reach out to them. That's one reason I like, content in general. It is more of a passive game for sure, right? Like it's a passive game. It's just like you kind of are a little more at the will of what the people need. When it comes down to like when I've talked to people in terms of like what works for a lot of people, almost everyone I've ever talked to references networking as like the main place that they get clients. Networking to me, one, it's not just going to an event and meeting 2 people and okay, that was networking. It's really about relationship building. So one, if we're talking about networking, like building a bigger network, getting more more people involved in it. Let's say you go to a networking event. If you're going to, let's say, a conference, the best advice I can give to you is like, don't just leave it to chance. If you're going to a conference, make sure you kind of have a good idea. Maybe if you know some people who are going, try to figure that out. Maybe again, post on LinkedIn, being like, hey, I'm going to go to this event. Do people want to connect? Again, whatever you can do to figure out who's there. Some ways that if you want to like get some more traction, you can throw a dinner or just a simple happy hour near the event or some sort of event near the event as well and get people to sign up, get people to go. It does take more work, right? Like, so it's not just like going to the event and then that's it, right? Like you do want to like get people to know that you're doing something there. Because that increases it from like whatever the 2 to 4 people you would have known to maybe 20 or 30. The next step is it doesn't stop there, right? Like if you met people that you thought were worth connecting with, keep the relationship going, right? Like ask to have a chat, maybe immediately after or at least a month after. Be like, hey, it was great chatting with you. Keep that relationship going. Because I think that's the other mistake I often see is like networking kind of just becomes this like, I'll just gather as many people as possible when you're really trying to build like a quality network. You're not trying to necessarily be this giant quantity. It should really be like, hey, I'm creating relationships where I genuinely care about these people. And then, that can eventually lead to things. So I think that's also an aspect is your growing side. And then again, then there's the maintaining side, which is like, hey, I have this group that I like, I reach out to them. I try to talk to them. I genuinely care about them. For people who are maybe less relationship driven, or at least like, it's just like you're more work driven, maybe less relationship driven, just have a list somewhere of people that like you want to reach out to maybe like once a week, once a month, once a year, just have some breakdown and then just check off once you've done it, and send them a quick message, whatever it might be, just to keep those relationships going because relationships take work. And most likely the other person's not going to do it. You're going to have to do it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have a question from Vladimir in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, you want me to read it or you got it?
Feel free to read
it. All right. Okay. What is a better strategy in your opinion? To specialize in something like Databricks, Snowflake, or streaming, or be more of a generalist with a larger potential market? I think, the answer with like Snowflake and Databricks, what's nice there is they both have big markets. So you can be a generalist and a Snowflake expert in the sense that like you can just be a generalist Snowflake person, because there's so many other tools on top of that. I think those are both tools that are big enough that you could specialize in both of those and get plenty of work just because of the TAM and the amount of work that is involved. So from there, answering more of like the specialist versus generalist, I think early on, it can make sense to be a generalist because you might not know what people need. So maybe you don't want to specialize too heavily. But as you kind of like, go forward, you'll start to figure out what people really, really want. And then you can maybe be more specific and be like, hey, I really like focusing on these specific problems. Like kind of the flip side or the joke there is, as you specialize, people almost expect you to be more of a generalist because they're like, hey, you're really good at doing this one thing because you focus so much energy on it. I'm sure you're good at everything, right? It's that bias where it's like, if you're good at one thing, you must be good at a lot of things. And so then you might actually find yourself being more generalist, and then you have to figure out, do you want to do those other things or not? But on the Snowflake and Databricks side, there's so much work there that if you are just like, hey, I'm going to answer a bunch of Snowflake questions and be the Snowflake person, there's a ton of work there. Jeff Goldberg, who's in the TFA community, is like, if you look up his content on LinkedIn, it's like he's like this Snowflake DBT guy. That's like his bit has been his thing, is really focusing on Snowflake and DBT. And I think, you can look at that and think, how can I kind of be on a similar wavelength? Cool. Let's see. Next question. I hear a lot of people recommending to specialize in a tool or method. I have found some success specializing in helping small companies establish their data capability. Do you think this approach can be sustainable long term? So, let's say again, we're focusing specifically on helping small companies set up their data infrastructure, and that's kind of where you're going to specialize in. That definitely can be something that is a successful strategy. A lot of small companies need help. Just digging into that specific market, the downside to that market is if there is a downturn, right? Like they tend to be some of the first ones to like not have extra budget, right? Because they don't have this big, massive budget to go into. Maybe they're right now easily spending $20,000, $30,000, maybe more, maybe less, to have you set up their data infrastructure. But that $20,000 or $30,000 is going to go away, in a downturn a little more easily than in enterprise, where enterprise probably has a little bit more budget, a little more wiggle room. They can push, some of the expenses onto their customers a little easier, or maybe on their suppliers a little easier. It's not to say that you can't target at that. I think it's a great space. It tends to move faster on the flip side, right? You don't have to spend as much time dealing with procurement and all of that. So I think that's, not a bad space to focus on. I put a lot of effort there, especially early on, because it was like, there's endless small businesses that always want more help doing data analytics. And there's more of them starting every day. So there's always going to be someone needing your help in that space. So I do think it's sustainable, but if it is probably going to be the one that's first impacted on a downturn. Let's see. Do you have any tips for women in how they bring credibility to the table when starting to look for freelance work, or not sure how to go about with a one-person startup? We actually had, again, in the TFA community, we had a chat. Her name's Selena Wong. She kind of shared some of her thoughts there as well, especially like credibility on the side of, there's some challenges that you might face where people might have some bias in that direction. Her big answer there was like, when I asked her, she's like, sometimes you just have to prove it more. She's like, it's the sad reality. She's like, sometimes you have to prove it. You have to work a little harder just to show that, if someone's questioning you, it's like, no, I know what I'm doing. I obviously can't speak much more from that in terms of my experience. But that was definitely the answer she shared. So hopefully that's at least a little helpful. I know it's not helpful in the sense of the reality, but it's hopefully helpful in terms of what she answered.
It looks like we don't have more questions in the chat. Do we have more questions?
Any?
Audience, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
I'll put in the chat.
Yeah.
We have some time.
Yeah, there's no rush.
I'd love to ask a question if I can.
Yeah, please.
I think a lot of times I work in marketing, and so I love what you're saying here. I think a lot of times I hear from people that when it comes to content creation, they feel like they don't have anything useful to say.
Mm,
That's always hard to
Yeah.
come up with ideas.
yeah.
You mentioned you started with content because you wanted to do it, like there was like something inside that needed to come out. How do you maintain that as you generate so much content?
A big way is through one, experiencing the problem, so the work itself, but two, talking to people, like talking to the people that you want to sell to. So if you feel stuck on like, I don't even know what people's pain points are, what I would say is try to find, like, one, if you have people in your network, reach out to them. That, like, try to find people who are your target persona, who you're selling to. Again, start with people that you know. If you don't know people, try to ask people to give you an intro if they know someone, or then you have to kind of go down the route of cold DMs and trying to engage with people and talk to them. Like, if you go talk to 10, 20 people that are your target persona and not sell it to them, just like purely like, hey, what is your day like? What is your problems? Like things like that. You'll start to create a list and you'll be like, oh my gosh, here's some themes. So recently, for example, I had like 3 or 4 data leaders tell me I have a hard time with my senior data analysts because they don't seem to like, they're struggling to kind of like meet the bar that I want them to, for like when they were give work out to their like, and to our basically business side, right? Like, okay, here's our report. It's just never where they want it to be. And so like, I realized I'm like, okay, there's 3 people who've told me this in the last 2 weeks. This is a problem. Like, to me, like, if that's enough people that, okay, I'm going to write an article about like, hey, here's how to help your analysts make the work you want, or get to the work that you want. So if you talk to enough people, you'll hear problems and you'll be like, oh, I have an answer to that. Let me write about that. So I think that's always a great way to get inspired, just to hear people, hear what they care about, hear what their problems are. Let's see. Do you have any recommendations about legal side of solopreneurship, recommendation services, etc.? My recommendations are one, I mean, get an accountant. Well, once you're doing enough work, get an accountant. If you're just doing a little, I usually say, like, if you're doing $10,000 a year, probably going to cost you too much to get an accountant. You should probably just set up, your own solo kind of business. Don't need an LLC, a sole proprietorship. Once you start doing, somewhere in that 25K plus range, then maybe you can start thinking about, okay, do I set up an LLC? Do I do an S corp? Things of that nature. Get an accountant to kind of help you out there. And then similarly, as you start doing larger contracts, right? You want to start having just find a lawyer that can do a contract that can help you set up at least a template for that, just so at least you can use that for future references. The other side is, make sure you have, as you start getting bigger, make sure you have insurance, like business insurance, liability insurance. Especially once you start working with larger enterprises, they usually expect you to have it. And usually in their contract, they'll tell you have to have it. Usually it's like $1 million of coverage per like incident or something of that nature, which I don't remember what it costs per year, but it's like $1,000 or $2,000. So that's why if you're only doing like 10 grand a year, probably makes less sense. And you're probably not touching things that are going to hurt you in the end. But once you go beyond that, you have to start thinking about it. But obviously, always, if you can get a free consultation, get a lawyer to make sure it's fully clear. I don't have any services in particular. My accountant, my parents had a business, so I honestly just inherited my parents' accountant, which my wife is now like, hey, maybe we should like review that, because you never actually went through a list of accountants and found them. So yeah, I hope that's at least helpful in getting you the right direction. I try. Legal is always interesting because it's one of those things I can give you general advice, but I'm not a lawyer myself. So let's see. Do you have a model for how you price your services, especially when starting? It can be tricky to know when to raise rates, etc., as our contribution and value increases. Good question. So the first thing I usually tell people is, in terms of like priorities, your focus should generally be like your niche and what you're selling. That's like the first thing you kind of have to answer. 2, how do you land clients? If you're not landing enough clients, it doesn't matter how you price to a degree. And then 3 is pricing. So in terms of pricing, so there's a few things that I will tell most people. It's like, 1, if you're trying to figure out, hey, do I land enough clients? Or sorry, do I increase my rates? There's a few rules of thumb. Some people like to say if the last like 10 out of the last maybe 10 prospects you had, everyone said yes immediately to your services, not all 10, sorry, 60% of them said yes to your services. So you pitch 10, 6 say yes. You should probably increase your rate, right? Because you're getting enough yeses. Or if you get 3 yeses in a row is another thing I've heard as well. It's like, hey, if you get 3 yeses in a row to your services, increase your rate, because you want some no's. You do want some no's there. It's better to have, less work for more money than it is to have more work for less money. So that's usually it. And then, I'll usually have like a kind of some general prices that I have based on maybe client complexity plus client size, and then some general services. So I have some services that I kind of sell and some pricing around that. So that's generally how I look at it overall.
That's an awesome advice on pricing.
Pricing is always hard. Again, I always like to think like if you don't have enough clients, it's maybe not the biggest focus. You can keep that simpler and just try to, price per hour and, find a rate that you're happy working at. But once you have like a lot of clients, then it becomes, or like a lot of prospects at least coming in, then at least you have the ability to risk asking for more.
Lots of great insight, Ben. I have to ask you about your community. You briefly mentioned that you have a community. Feel free to make a pitch here and also put links in the chat. I'm sure the attendees would love to join.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think early on, I had a lot of people reach out to me asking questions about like, how do I start consulting? I think especially like during the whole, I'm going to put the link here, during the whole like big tech layoff kind of initial, I think it was like the first one was like 2023, maybe it was 2024. I think it was 2023. I had a lot of people reaching out and being like, even if they weren't fired, they were like, okay, big tech is not as safe. And Ben went from big tech to consulting. How do I do that? So I had a lot of people ask that, and I would do one-on-ones for a little bit. And then eventually I built a course and I started doing that. But then I was like, a course is great, but I think the thing that people that are trying to break into consulting need more than anything else is just a community, just a space to go to ask questions, because questions kind of come up, through time. It's like, hey, how do I price? How do I do this? And all of that. So I was like, okay, I'll create a community. That way, one, you have people you can come alongside with. And if you have problems, you can ask them. So I create a community. I call it the Technical Freelancer Academy. It's got a lot of free resources, honestly. Like there's a paid section, but there's a ton of content that I put out for free. We just had his name is Richard Millington. He puts out a lot of really good content. He did a whole like hour-long webinar that you can watch about the brutal truth about consulting. So if you want to watch that, you can watch that, and he'll just tell you kind of some of the things he's learned. He's been consulting considerably longer than I have. He's been doing like 15 years. More in the community space. So if it's not tech, he was really big into communities and helping companies grow communities like Microsoft and some other companies. So that's great. And there's just a ton of like people sharing and other content there. I think right now we're at like 1,500 members. Again, there's like a whole space. I call it weeklies. Again, free to post in, and people just share like, hey, what have I accomplished maybe in the last week or month? Just because again, I think that keeps you accountable. And I think that's the biggest thing is like sometimes you just need a place to be like, hey, something's not working. I just want to post it somewhere because I have no one to really talk to about it. So that's really the community.
And this brings up one of the challenges of solopreneurship, that it can get lonely. You are alone, and like all the decisions, all the responsibilities on you. And this is something that might be a bit frightening. And I know a few people who get excited about being a founder and being in charge, but then a year or two into it, they realize that this is actually hard to be responsible for everything. And having that community where you can talk to people, share all your challenges, and get insights from those who've been a bit further in this journey is super helpful. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. We have some room for more questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat. Hit yourself, ask more questions. If we don't have questions, that's okay too. It is time for tea and coffee, I'm sure can be welcome.
Yeah. This was great. Love the questions.
I think the room is quiet.
Yeah.
It's been a
Oh.
fantastic discussion, Ben, and thank you so much for sharing your insights navigating the consulting world. It is exciting, but it comes with some challenges. I truly appreciate your time, and I also would like to thank our audience for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Would like to stay connected, please check out our LinkedIn group. Also check out Ben on LinkedIn. I know his feed is very active. I've been following it and enjoying some content that he shares. And I hope to see you all soon.
Yep. Thank you all.